Welcome to the Drug-Free Action Alliance program webinar series. I am Derek Longmire and will serve as today's monitor. Due to the quantity of callers, all attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. However, we do want your feedback, so if you have questions, please enter them into the questions field of your GoToWebinar navigation panel. Technical assistance questions will be answered in the order in which they are received, and program-specific questions will be queued until the question and answer portion of today's session. Should you have technical difficulties during today's webinar, please contact the GoToWebinar helpline. That number is 800-263-6317. They will need to know your webinar ID, and that ID is 610-233-961. And I'm sure you're frantically trying to write this down, so let me say that one more time. The GoToWebinar helpline number is 800-263-6317. And the webinar ID is 610-233-961. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Drug-Free Action Alliance, we are a nonprofit organization with specialization in program development focused on strengthening community coalitions and enhancing environmental prevention. Drug-Free Action Alliance is based in Columbus, Ohio, with programming implemented in all 50 states as well as U.S. territories and other countries. For those of you in your community who are unable to join us today, the session will be recorded. Additionally, as a follow-up to today's training, I will send a link to the recorded webinar, the PowerPoint slides, a certificate of attendance, and other related information that will assist you in your community. Today's presenter is Allison Scherer. Allison has worked in the field of alcohol and other drug abuse prevention for over 20 years and has held leadership positions at the international, state, and local levels. Allison serves in the role of Director of Prevention Programs and Services here at Drug-Free Action Alliance. Allison, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Derek. And welcome, everybody, to Making the Case for Coalitions, our October webinar. Happy to be here and be part of this for you today. So let's just get started with some things that we sometimes hear. Sometimes we may hear our boss say something like, hey, it's just another meeting. You got other things to do. We've got direct hours that you need to fill. How do we justify going to another meeting? Sometimes we ourselves see a coalition meeting on our calendar and we think, God, I cannot sit through another meeting for meeting's sake. Or we hear from our boss again that our funder doesn't pay for us to attend meetings. Or even worse, we leave a meeting and we think, well, at least the donuts were good. So we hear a lot of things that sometimes coalitions get a lot of flack about. So the question today that we want to talk about is, how do we make a case for coalitions with our bosses, with our funders, with community leaders, because their time is precious as well? How do we get them to the table? With our legislators, so that they listen to our coalitions, but also so that they fund coalitions and they support coalition work. But sometimes we even need to make a case for coalitions for ourselves. So we're going to take a look at all of that today. Before we do, I want to get an idea of who's on the line. So we're going to do a little poll here to get a sense of where you're all coming from. So watch your screen for a question that is coming your way, and please select the answer that best fits for you. Okay, it looks like we've had the majority of folks answer that, so let's take a look at the results. And we're seeing that most of the people on the line today are coalition staff. That helps me know how to focus this webinar today, as well as 22 folks actually sit at coalition tables as a coalition member. We have a few folks who are actually considering that they may convene a coalition, and that may be something new for them that they've not been involved in before, or something new for their community that they need to get some buy-in for. And we have 3% of folks on the line who are a funder, who may be looking for where's the value and what's the return on investment for coalitions. And 18%, unfortunately, about 1 out of 5 of you, we have no idea what headset you're wearing as you sit on this webinar. But that was still helpful to get an idea who was on the line. So let's go ahead and proceed. And I want to ask you guys another quick interactive moment here. We're going to ask you to use your question box there on your dashboard from GoToWebinar and answer the question, what challenges have you faced in making a case for coalition work? And some of you may not have faced any challenges, and just feel free to sit tight. But for those of you that have had some challenges in making a case for coalition work, share some of that. And as I present, Derek's going to take a look through those, and then in a little bit he will surface some of those for us, and we'll hear some of the trends and some of your answers. So let's just take a minute and give folks some time to share what challenges you yourself have faced in making a case for coalition work, whether it's to your boss, to a funder, to community leaders you're trying to get to the table, or maybe even to yourself about getting up each day and doing this work or going to that meeting. We got some great answers coming in, so thanks for taking that time. While you guys continue to do that, I'm going to go ahead and proceed with presenting, but feel free as you think of a challenge, still throw it into your question box so that Derek can see that. So before we can really listen to the challenges that you faced in making a case, I want to be sure that we're all on the same page. And so to get on the same page, and there's our getting on the same page graphic. Isn't that great? So we will need to get on the same page because we can't just make a case for just another meeting. And coalitions shouldn't feel like just another meeting. Coalitions need to be more than that. So let's be really clear with each other first what a coalition is, what an effective coalition looks like, what are the earmarks of effective coalitioning. We're making that a verb now. Coalescing is probably the more appropriate one. And as we get on the same page with that, then we'll hear what challenges you've had making a case for that kind of work, and then we'll share some things from our point of view as well as tips from the rest of you on the line about how to make a case for it. So that's kind of our agenda for today. So let's start first with just getting on the same page about the premise of coalitions. And basically, we stand on this platform of a belief that community problems are most effectively solved with community solutions. So let's take a look at a definition. A coalition is a formal arrangement for collaboration between stakeholder groups across diverse sectors of a community. And we're going to look at a community wheel here in a bit to see what all does that mean? What sectors are we talking about? And each group within those community sectors still retains their own identity, but they're all putting their hands on deck and agreeing to coalesce, to work together toward a common goal. So there's shared vision. That means you need to take some time to come to a shared vision. Now we've got the word stakeholder there really highlighted, so let's define what a stakeholder really is. So when it comes to coalition work, we should think of stakeholders as anyone or any entity that is affected by the problem and or has resources that they could contribute toward the solutions to the problem. So they have a perspective on the problem, are affected by the problem, have resources to contribute to the problem, and or they're people with influence. And that can be formal leaders like government leaders, a police chief, your superintendent or principals, the head of that social service organization, but you can't discount your informal leaders either. What VC League in Oakland, California, a long-term grassroots organizer, always talks about and calls the mamas and the papas. You know, those folks in the community who other people in the community won't buy into something unless they check with them first. Right, so where are those informal leaders that maybe don't wear a title or by position, but they have a position in the community? People definitely look to them. So think about who are all your people with influence. Those are stakeholders. And then you also want to look at all that across that diverse cross-section of your community. So what do coalitions do? A couple things that they do. They change community conditions on whatever your chosen issue is. They use multiple strategies across those multiple sectors we're going to look at here in just a little bit. We, as coalitions, also affect the entire social environment, right? We're not just looking at youth. For example, with an alcohol, tobacco, other drug abuse-focused coalition, substance abuse is an issue across the lifespan. There are roles adults play, even when it comes to youth use. If you're going to change youth use, you also have to address adults, but ideally coalitions are looking across the entire environment and community and population level change, so ideally we're looking across the lifespan, right? So the entire social environment of the issue, the problem. We're developing a broad base of support and teamwork when we're doing coalition work, and with the goal that we're really looking to bring results that are long-lasting, not just each new generation. For example, if we are concerned about youth and let's say underage drinking, we've got every new generation of kids in that age of first youth, and then we got that next generation coming up. Instead, we're really looking at changing the environment, the context in which these choices are made. and the fabric of our community, that what factors contribute to those high-risk choices. And by making changes at the community level, those changes are much more long-lasting. So I think I'll also define what a coalition is. It helps to understand real clearly what a coalition is not. So first up, coalition is not a prevention program. And we run into this a lot as coalitions are forming, and folks say, we need to do this, we need to do that. And it sounds like they're wanting to duplicate what a prevention agency or a prevention program already does or is funded to do in their community. So let's take just a brief minute and take a look at the difference between a prevention program and a coalition. So a prevention program is responsible for individual participants, whereas a coalition is responsible for all members of a full community. However you define that community, whether it's geographically a neighborhood with street boundaries, a school district, a township, a municipality, a county, however a coalition is defining that geographic boundaries of that community. It's all the members, not individuals. We also are, as coalitions, or prevention programs are usually focused then on individual factors and individual risk and protective factors, whereas coalitions are most effective when we focus on environmental factors. Prevention programs are more likely going to be targeting outcomes for individual participants and tracking and evaluating and monitoring those outcomes at the individual level, whereas coalitions are targeting community-level outcomes, population-level outcomes to show that we're being effective. Prevention programs are limited in their activities when it comes to addressing policy change. They're probably limited by their funding. They're probably limited by their scopes of practice or their agency platform. But when it comes to coalitions, they have a very strong role in affecting policy change. And policy doesn't just have to mean laws. There are many levels of policy in a community, many levels, whether it's drug-free workplace policies, whether it's that athletic team policy or that dorm drug-free policy. Okay, lots of ways to look at local level policies, regulations, memorandums of understanding of how systems will work together, all the way up to laws, whether they be local, state, or national. So coalitions really look at that environmental level of work. Let's continue our thoughts. Beyond not being a prevention program, what else is a coalition not? Well, it's not a human service organization. We don't do direct service, really, as coalitions. And if you go formally into funding for such as the drug-free communities funding, they have very limited amount of that funding that can be used for what they define as direct service. Really, you're supposed to be doing coalition work with that funding, and that's not duplicating direct services that should be being done by other organizations in the community. Coalitions are also not externally run or externally driven organizations. They really should be run from the inside out. They're member driven, and that means of the community, by the community, for the community. They're not an automatic link to the grassroots, and we need to remember that a lot of times larger folks, whether it's legislators, funders, bigwigs, think when they come and they're interacting with a coalition that they're really getting with that grassroots. Some coalitions are very grassroots based. Some are community stakeholder leaders who are working to engage the grassroots, but the people around the table are still mostly leadership. So it depends on the phase of development and the origins of a coalition. Some rise from the grassroots up, some come from community leadership and expand out to include grassroots. So not every coalition is the same, and not every one of them is equally engaging grassroots organizing. A coalition is not a quick fix for any problem. In fact, when coalitions are taking on these, whatever their issue is, whether it's alcohol and other drugs, violence, suicide, other mental health or behavioral issues, those kinds of issues that have impact into a community and a fabric of a community that create problems in a community, those issues are long-standing with a lot of roots, that really weave out, and they aren't solved with any kind of a quick fix single solution. So when coalitions come together, they've got to understand, they've got to be in it for the long haul, that we're looking at long-term change. These problems didn't happen overnight. They're not going to go away overnight. We need to be grounded in good science, and be planful in what we do. And we can't just, I always think of, put on a show. We can't just like put on a meeting or have a town hall and then everyone go, yes, and this won't be a problem anymore. They're never a quick fix. They really are a longer-term solution. All right, so let's take a brief moment here, too, because I would think based on our mission and who's on our mailing list and who's signed on to this webinar, you're probably a coalition that's looking at focusing on prevention, maybe not just of substance abuse, but some other community problems that are related to substance abuse. Maybe the work you're doing has an expanded focus or already had a more wellness focus. But I want to talk more just about those coalitions that are focusing on prevention and some things we all need to be on the same page too. Because if the coalition is taking a prevention platform and wanting to be proactive on preventing some problem, we need to be sure that we're also understanding that the work we're doing means that it's comprehensive prevention and that prevention is more than just education. So I just want to take a little side trip here to look at different ways prevention can be focused to find the role that coalition plays within the spectrum of prevention work. Prevention is much more than education. When you think of education, you're probably, again, thinking of kids. Most people do. They think about school-based, sometimes community-based prevention, direct work with kids that has an individual focus, which means that it's trying to impact individual behaviors or individual beliefs or attitudes or the relationship between an individual and alcohol, tobacco, and other drug-related problems or whatever your chosen problem is. They're probably trying to address individual-level participation in skill development like problem-solving, coping skills, refusal skills. That's individually focused prevention, but prevention can also have a more environmental focus. And when we're focusing on environment, oops, that looks like my animation's off here. I'm just going to put them all up here, and then we'll see where we go. All right, so our first bullet, social, political, economic context of alcohol, tobacco, other drug-related problems, or again, whatever problem we've chosen to focus on. So these choices and these problems and the choices people make around high-risk behaviors, they don't happen in a vacuum. They have a social, political, economic context. Environmental prevention focuses on that. That includes things like the social norms and our community norms of what's accepted, what's not. Where do we have apathy? Where is there a lot of just, a given, that's a rite of passage, right? That's just something people do at that stage in their life. Availability and access, and that's real important for something like alcohol, tobacco, other drugs. Media influence and how we can control that or limit that or use the media influence for the good. If we can't put a filter up for the negative high-risk messages, how do we put a positive message out there and use the media for our message, or to maybe advocate and do media advocacy to create policy or policy changes, and making sure our policies are effective and meaningful and on target and timely with our community, as well as doing all of that through collective action where the community is owning the problem, so they're owning the solution, which means that as we look at these two focuses of prevention side by side, we know that it really stands out. I hope it's pretty clear that coalitions are best suited to work on the right side of your slide. And with that environmental focus, that's what collective action is best suited to work around, all right? I'm going to bring the individual back and look at where the role is with coalitions with that in just a minute, because I do want to just emphasize, I'm not saying throw out individual strategies. We need in prevention a comprehensive approach throughout our communities, between all our prevention agencies, health entities, all our social service organizations, and our coalition. We need to ensure there's a comprehensive plan and approach where we're addressing all the individual factors as well as the environmental factors if we're going to be successful. And the key with coalition is helping to make sure we don't duplicate our efforts. So we each get our dance space, but we're all still, creating this beautiful dance together, right, that works well together. So I love this headset from the Prevention Institute, which is not alcohol and drug specific prevention. It's very general prevention. In fact, they're very focused on wellness and health in a more traditional sense of like physical health and a lot of the work they do. But they have a really nice spectrum here, as they call it, of the 6 levels of prevention. So I want to start at the bottom of the slide and work our way up from level 1 through 6 of prevention. On the more individual level, level 1 is where we're strengthening those individual knowledges and skills. All that individual attitude and behavior change and skill development that we talked about on the left side of that previous slide, where we're enhancing the individual capability to follow through with healthy choices, right? A next step up that's still more focused toward the individual, but we're promoting community education. So we're reaching groups of individuals with information and resources that help promote those healthy choices. Okay, so we're not just doing that individual one-on-one, we might be reaching out to groups, and it's all still with the goal of that individual level change. By level 3, we're starting to get a little more systemic and looking at gatekeepers, and not just teachers or parents, but people like, for example, if you are focused on youth a little bit more, who has access to those individuals, and do they have what they need? How do we build their capacity so that they can transmit skills and knowledge to others? And that can start to go either way. They may be working then to change individual level factors, risk protective factors, or they may be starting to also look more at a community level change. And then we get those providers more engaged in level 4 through a network or fostering a formal coalition where we convene groups for broader goals and greater impact and joint action with a shared vision that's starting to be focused not as much at the individual level but more at a community level, and looking at those environmental factors of community norms, access availability, media messages, policy and enforcement. And then we start working together to say, what can we do to start changing organizational practices or community-level practices? What regulations, what memorandums of understanding do we need between these different sectors or systems in our community that will help move us in a better direction as a community on this issue? And level 6, what policies, what legislation do we need? And again, policies aren't always just laws. Policies can be at the organizational level too. So think that across the spectrum of a community. So I love these 6 levels of prevention and thinking of them on that continuum from individual level change up to community. For prevention to be effective, we need to be, as communities, engaged at all 6 levels. Now, when it comes to the coalition being part of supporting all of that, we've talked about diverse sectors of the community. So let's take a look at that community wheel I was talking about. Coalitions work to involve the whole community, and here's one example of a community wheel. There's some different ones out there, different ways. Usually are about 12 or so sectors, depending on how people slice and dice it. But everything from youth and media and the schools and senior citizens and service organizations and parents to government and law enforcement and faith community and businesses, not just by going to business and putting our hand out and saying, can you give us money, but understanding how business is impacted by our issue and that they have a stake in the solution and that they need to be a partner at the table in helping to foster that solution. They're a community partner, not just a wallet, right? Social service agencies, I may have mentioned, medical and health. So we really need all players because all these sectors are impacted by the problem. They all have a stake in the solution. They all have a perspective on the solution, and they all should be putting their hands on deck to help foster that solution to happen. So putting these 2 graphics together, which I love doing, what coalitions are really doing is they're fostering engagement across all these community sectors to ensure that their given community has a comprehensive plan and is taking action across all 6 levels of prevention. Now I want to layer this in with just one more headset, and I want you to look at on that right side of the screen that the coalition role is not to provide the individual level prevention. We don't do direct service when we do coalition work. Our job of coalitions is to advocate for and ensure that the capacity of the community is there, and to assess where there's gaps and who has those resources, and how do we reduce the barriers to ensure that there's enough of that individual focused prevention happening. So we're doing systems work and advocacy and relationship building and resource sharing promotion to ensure that we have a broad enough base across the individuals in the community at the right key intervention times, maybe a transitional age or developmental period in someone's life, where people have what they need to make healthy choices. And as you go up the 6 levels of prevention toward that more community level, that's where coalitions become more the active agent and the change agent, where they're doing that actual level of work. So hopefully that's helpful in getting us all on the same page. But before we finish this, I want to just also say, what is the role of all these players as they come to your coalition table? And you may not have all 12, for example, of this piece of the pie. You may have people at the right time, for the right moment, for the right level of change, right? There are some grants that may say you have to have a representative from every single one of these sectors. And that's not always a real organic coalition development way to look at that. I sometimes don't like when that gets imposed, because it's really about, do we have the right people at the right time to have the capacity to do what we next need to do to achieve everything that's on that slide implies. So I want you to think about what the role is of each of those community change partners as we build that wheel and have the right people at the right time. That what we need their buy-in for is they're not just coming to a table, sharing their thoughts and eating a donut and leaving. It's not meeting for meeting's sake. That there's a plan. We're doing shared action, shared vision for shared action for shared ownership of the change in the community. But they also leave there going back to their community sector and the other players they work with and saying, we got to change how we operate. Here's something we've got to do that's part of moving toward this solution. So we're going to transform how I myself operate, or my agency operates, or my sector operates. And I'm also going to be a vocal champion and a change agent that's active in this larger process. You know, my hand's on deck, I'm here. What can we do to help? So it's not meeting for meeting's sake. So with that as our headset of the ideal of how coalitions are focused and what they're trying to achieve, I guess the question is, do coalitions work? And as we look across the literature, some things to keep in mind. Coalitions as an approach are only about 30 years old. And I know that may sound long, but in the scope of, you know, really researching what works and what doesn't, that's young. That's still pretty young. And the research we do have is honestly quite mixed. And more than anything, the literature is really looking at all the variables among coalitions and instead starts to talk about what are some earmarks of effective coalition work that people need to strive for in order to be the ones that are effective. Because some coalitions honestly don't work because they're not organized in a way to work. They're not engaged in comprehensive planning. They are meeting for meeting's sake. People are getting frustrated and taking their toys and going home, and the coalition is dying on the vine, or it's too staff-driven and it's not member-driven, right? So let's take a look at some of the things that the research is telling us about whether coalitions work. And one of those is really the lessons learned from the research. Just kind of a quick summary. The coalitions are really, the framework we need to have is that they're best seen as a means to an end. They're about infrastructure and planning process. They're not like a program. You're never going to see the name of a coalition on NREP. We're not programs. We provide infrastructure and planning for shared tasks and responsibilities for change. We're not a program, right? So we're a means to an end. And that may mean that coalitions have a shelf life. We did what we said we were going to do, and now we're going to disband. Coalitions don't have to be forever unless they go, wow, we were so successful in making that change. Here's something really related to it. What's next? Let's take that on now, because we got the infrastructure and we've got that. We've learned from a planning process, and we can act together and continue to make great change. So some coalitions shift their focus and keep working together because they've had such great success. Some coalitions say we did our job and they disband, and that's okay. That's okay. Community readiness is a, oh, sorry, forgot I was, there we go. Community readiness vastly affects the success as well of coalitions. And a lot of people, and that could be a whole webinar all on its own. If you've never heard that term before, I want you to put it on a Post-it note right now, and above it you're writing to do. Google community readiness. Because you need to learn as much as you can about community readiness, because if your community is not ready for change, it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to be spinning your wheels. So, you know, you may have heard the term before. You got to meet, you know, individually. If you even think about counseling, you got to meet somebody where they're at. Community coalitions need to assess their level of community readiness, and they need to meet their community where it's at. And there is research about that, and there are even strategies around what strategies do you need to do first to increase your community's readiness so that they're ready for the larger, bigger change strategies. So it's almost like being a farmer, and you got to work that ground before you can plant those seeds, and then you water it before you ever get a plant, right? And then you got to do all that other fertilizing and fostering and nurturing that plant to grow big and strong and get nice deep roots. So when you think about all the way back to the beginning, readiness is really truly about having that hard ground right there and assessing what's my first step in order to prep this ground for what I'm wanting to plant in it, what kind of change we need to plant in it. I think my analogy started to fall apart there at some point because I'm not a farmer. Anyway, so another big piece here on coalitions and what we've learned from the research is that intentionality is crucial. It's not just coming together and saying, let's put on a show and let's all work together. You got to have a strategic plan that guides the work. And the meetings have to be tied to purposeful actions where you're checking things off that list and there's work that's being done between the meetings. And meetings are about reporting out progress. So there's actual shared vision and action planning that's happened. That intentionality is really key, is what the research says. Without it, coalitions are, hey, that was a pretty good donut, Structure and organizational capacity has been a very strong theme in the literature, and it can be volunteer-driven, but honestly, the research is showing that there's a lot of reason why to find some kind of funding, because coalitions that have staff that help support the work, not do the work for the members, but in a sense help keep track of the work and update the action planner and call and check in on members. How are you coming on that task? Do you need any resources? How can I help? How can I support you in that task? Don't tie their shoes for them, but put the laces in their hand and remind them which way it goes next, and then help build their capacity so that they can do it. So staffing helps keep an eye on all the resources that are not just money, but the talent and the work and the effectiveness and the progress on the action plan, and kind of in a sense are ushering it in. They're the farmers getting the water out there and putting it on those seeds. An attempt to go back to my possibly ill-advised farming analogy. All right, so coalition effectiveness, some other thoughts on it, and summary kind of from the research. The research is finding that coalitions really need to focus on influencing the community population rather than the individual. We talked about that. Research supports that. The community at large, not just people who are at risk, not just certain sub-risk populations, that again is population level change. It's universal. It's for everybody. That they need to have a community systems approach. We've talked about that. And that local policy as a means to produce systems change needs to be a focus. Right? That again, focusing on that environmental level. Also, that research is finding that coalitions are most successful when they engage again in those environmental strategies we've talked about to change community-wide norms and policies, not on individual level change, and that they focus on shifting the culture. Again, whether it's substance abuse, which we focus on a lot here, and a lot of our coalitions do, or some other behavioral health issue as more and more coalitions are forming to address, right? That helps move our community toward healthier norms and expectations, the context in which individual choices are made. So for that slide and the last one on coalition effectiveness, you've had a little research study reference there at the bottom of your slide. You'll see when you get this handout, which you will be getting in PDF form with your certificate of completion here in a few days. The other piece that we found in the research, coalitions are effective if they can sustain leadership and develop new leadership. That's a key component to effectiveness. If they're really using community data to drive their planning, they're not assumption-driven in what they're planning and doing, they're data-driven. They've gone and tested their assumptions with data, and they know what the real true profile of their community. And then they develop a plan for changing that community. They're using those evidence-based strategies, and they're assessing resources, I should probably say accessing resources, sorry, outside of their community, okay? So that study found these 5 things, and anyone who knows the SPIF model may already be going, well, look at that. That first bullet's all about capacity. And then we're talking about assessment and planning and implementing evidence-based strategies. And wow, sustainability is involved here. Hey, any surprise that a lot of folks are talking about the strategic prevention framework as the thing that coalitions should be standing on in order to get their work done, in order to organize the work they do. Some of you may already, probably many of you ideally, are already familiar with the strategic prevention framework. Some of you may be seeing this flower for the first time. As you just kind of look at it, know that the first step really starts with assessment. That's why it's at the top, and then you work your way down to capacity and on around that flower. And that's the steps for organizing your community and building its capacity and creating your plan and evaluating whether it's working and making sure you're culturally competent and that everything and the change that you achieve is sustainable. Not that the programming, because it shouldn't be a program, but your strategies are sustainable or your coalition's sustainable, that your outcomes are sustainable. That's the key. All right? So this strategic prevention framework really comes right off that research. I'm going to go back to the slide before. You see it right here. Okay? It's everything the research says that coalitions need to do to be effective, so you really should be using the strategic prevention framework to organize your work. For those of you not as familiar with that or who haven't had much training on that or seen it maybe for the first time, that will be the focus of our November 19th webinar that Derek and I are going to co-present. So make a note in your calendar if you've not already, and you can. We'll tell you at the end of the session how you can get registered to attend that webinar as well. But we're not going to cover it now, but I will tell you what the Strategic Prevention Framework will do. Is it's going to help you get a picture of your community's profile, as well as help you assess your community's readiness. And when you put those together, through what it says you need to do around planning is you build capacity and understanding the root causes and the research of what research says why your problem behavior happens in your community. And you've got your own community research that tells you your local conditions of why it's happening. Then you marry that with the evidence-based strategies. Doing all that together is what gets you to community change. And the SPIF is your roadmap to add all that together and achieve the change that you want to create. And for those of you who have been on webinars with us before, this next slide is going to look real familiar, but I just want to make a side note here that, a lot of coalitions form out of, people coming together and saying, there's a problem, we need change. But then there's this, wait a minute, which way's best? What do we do? How do we make that change? And we're big fans of reminding people that prevention is both a movement. Everyone on the left side of that slide, you need that energy and that movement for change, but you've got to marry it with the discipline and the science of prevention, right? And that's a real important piece of this. So as we think about that, the SPIF is going to help us marry the movement side as well as even increase that feeling of movement by having strategies that increase our readiness and have more people at the table and saying, yep, this is a problem, I'm on board, I want to be part of the solution, but that solution is going to be based in the science of evidence-based practices. So let's take it back to our original question. How do we make a case for coalitions with all these different players and even with ourselves? So I want to start first by asking Derek to share some of the challenges that you guys said when you came into your question box earlier that you face in making a case for coalition work. Derek?
Thank you, Allison. And Allison and I kind of chatted about what some of these challenges might be before the session began, and we were right on target. So it looks like the primary challenge, and this is the one that we thought would be secondary, but the primary challenge that you had all listed would be related to recruitment and engagement. And that would be engaging, not only getting all those sectors of the community, but also looking at those community leaders. Also, having too many meetings or not enough time, so you're looking to engage those community leaders or those other partners, and they don't have enough time, or they're having difficulty understanding why it's important to attend your meeting and maybe not someone else's meeting that might have another social service type angle or request. Getting and maintaining that diverse group, as Allison talked about, with a good representation of the various sectors of your community. And not preaching to the choir. Some of the challenges is just having those 3 to 5 core people. And so you have your meetings and you see those same people. And conversely with that is you've got those 3 to 5 people that are so engaged, but also the challenge of having them just get burnt out because there's nobody else helping to kind of carry some of the weight of the coalition. Another big trend that we saw is what I thought would be number 1, but it was actually the second one, is looking at that piece related to funding and sustainability. So funding from, even just getting funding from whatever the funders might look like, whether it would be from a local entity, a state entity, or local businesses. And with funding, there's strings attached with that. So You might have funding, but it will give you specific priorities or directives from the funders that may not be consistent with what the vision or the goals of your coalition are. And having, again, not a priority of the funders of you're trying to get some money, but your issue is just not a priority. And then also quantifying the outcomes. When you're looking at the funding and really looking at how you can show the progress that you've made, which could be different than some education-based prevention programs where we can quantify the number of students that sat through it, some of the other things that could happen there. Another challenge that we saw pretty commonly here was effectiveness in action. So there's either they're not seeing immediate change within the community, or there's too much talking. A lot of talk that I saw in the comments about the SPIF process and it being a process that leads up to action, but there's a whole lot of groundwork that really needs to take place before you get there. Breaking the norms of an established coalition. So there may be a coalition that's been in existence for 10 or 20 years, and there's not really an interest to change because it's just the way we've always done things. And with that, you could kind of stray from the focus of the mission and the goals of the organization. So those can be challenges as well. And then also looking at territory issues, whether that be trying to identify the coalition versus the DFC-funded organization who might be the financial agent for, or the fiscal agent for it. Also looking at having various coalitions within one community and trying to stand apart from those. Staying focused on related to the issues of the community, and there might be a focus on poverty or joblessness or other things that are more pressing issues, and not stepping on toes of other partners. When you're looking at engagement, law enforcement was mentioned here, that sometimes law enforcement doesn't want to partner with one another, or there seems to be a disconnect between law enforcement and from some of the other coalition partners. And then, as Allison kind of alluded to, is some of the challenges of having paid staff in their roles versus the volunteer roles. And a lot of times the paid staff are expected to do it all, and the volunteers are just kind of there to provide some feedback or direction as to what the paid staff should be doing. And then the last bit that I saw as common trends were related to community buy-in, having community understand the value of the coalition, and really making the community realize that the issues that the community is experiencing is affecting everyone within the community, so it's the responsibility to the community to then improve it all. So there was a lot of variety within the responses, so thank you for all of those who provided feedback.
Great. Wow, and I'll tell you, that is quite a list. And as I'm looking at trends within the trends that Derek just had nicely organized that into, I heard not just challenges on selling the concept or the idea of coalitions, which might have been a clearer question, because I'm also hearing a lot of challenges that you face in just doing the work. And from everything from recruitment, which can include selling the concept of coalition in order to get a partner or a new person to the table or a new organization to the table. But I'm also hearing the challenges of turf and conflict resolution and a lot of things that are really just ongoing about coalition work. There is no way between now and the end of time of this webinar that we're going to get to that level of depth, but what I do love is that Derek made a nice little summary sheet for himself on those, and we also from GoToWebinar can get everything that came up in the questions. We'll get a printout of that, and we will use that to inform some future tools and toolkits as well as trainings that we provide here from from Drug-Free Action Alliance. So I think that's a real important piece of where we go from here. So I want to bring us back focusing on just the idea that this webinar was designed for is selling the concept of coalition. So when you think about your elevator speech, or if you had to present it, or you just had to talk to someone about what do coalitions do and why are they important, all right? I'm going to give you about 6 different headsets with varying degrees of depth that you might use with various targets in order to sell the concept or the idea of coalition. So when we're talking at first, I do think that it is meaningful. Oh, you know what? I lied. Before we do that, we actually want to put in another question box so that we have some more things that Derek can summarize for us by the end of the webinar. If you would take a minute to throw some things into the question box for those of you who have successfully sold the concept of coalition to a key player, partner, funder, your boss, yourself, about why you're going to spend that time there. What tips can you share? What headsets worked for you in selling the concept of coalition to others? So take a minute, and as I'm presenting some of the ones that I'm sharing that are from that general headset, let's see what you guys also come up with. All right, now here's the first headset, and I do think this is important. This is a nice bumper sticker soundbite. Prevention is both a movement and a discipline, and coalitions really do provide both the movement and the discipline. It marries it together. So there's a lot you can say when you start off with that kind of bumper sticker way of talking about it. Okay. Second headset for you. We got two slides that you'll see in when you get your handout. You can copy and use these that are advantages. Okay, two slides on advantages of community coalitions, that they do help increase the community's readiness for change. Tie that to the movement. That they help communities to address new and broader issues. You know, they can be flexible and responsive. They, you know, versus a program that's tied to its specific funding and funder and direct hours. That you may have a prevention agency who there's a new and emerging issue, but they're not funded to address it. And coalitions are more flexible and can. Okay, that's that second bullet. Third bullet: coalitions can provide a vital service to communities by serving as a clearinghouse for all the relevant community data on that given chosen issue. Because juvie court may have data. Mental health and service organizations or substance abuse service organizations may have some data. Law enforcement has data. Health community has data. Hospitals have data. Schools have data. How do we put all that data under one clearinghouse and develop you know, a clearinghouse for data that any entity can use for their planning? That's a beautiful advantage for a community, so everyone can be more data-driven in what they do. Coalitions provide the most effective means to address environmental factors. We've talked about that. Facilitating our chosen issues such as alcohol, tobacco, other drugs across a lifespan, not just with kids, so we're being community-focused. Coalitions result in systemic level change that helps scarce resources stretch further and that really decrease duplication of services. And depending on who you're talking to, that could be a big selling point. Right, a high-level community funder who looks at gaps and duplication and is saying, you know, we got too many folks doing the same thing and all these gaps are going unmet. Coalitions help get that bird's eye view in a community, so we use our resources more meaningfully and effectively and in joint action. The second headset, or second slide here on advantages, really looks at the capacity building piece, building the capacity of a community to address its own problems by maximizing the power of individuals. That's a nice bumper sticker. That we mobilize talent, that we're developing widespread support and getting more ownership. I always say a community's got to own a problem before they can own the solution. So the more broad-based and widespread our membership and support, the more the support for the solution is. Here's a money, dollars, and cents, that it leverages additional dollars, because you get more partners at the table and they have more access to different funding streams or different resources, more volunteer hours, in-kind donations. It may also get you more community support, so maybe you can finally pass that levy for more actual direct services. That's part of the decreasing barriers and ensuring more individually focused services are happening. But that first bullet under leveraging additional dollars, standard return on investment in research on coalitions is at minimum doubling your return on investment of actual dollars, and that includes in kind, to being worth at least double that in the work that you do. I can tell you that across Ohio in different times, you know, as a statewide organization supporting coalitions all throughout Ohio, we've had different times where we've provided mini grants to coalitions. For example, with our Parents Who Host program, historically, we used to provide mini grants of $1,000, $2,000, or $3,000 for specific things they might do at the community level around that social hosting issue with parents, and addressing it in their community in an environmental way. And as a pain as it was for us at the end of the fiscal year, it was also kind of like, wow, look at that. Look at where our coalitions have come in just a few short years. We would have coalitions saying, I can't use all the money. Even just $1,000, some communities were like, we only use 200, here's 800 back, and we're like, we don't want the money back. We can't do anything with it in, less than 30 days at the end of the fiscal year. But what an amazing testimony to their level of community buy-in that they ended up getting so much in kind, or businesses even saying, we'll print that for you, you don't need to pay for it. Amazing community buy-in to where they didn't even need the money, right? So that's that turnkey kind of stuff that really creates a return on investment. And coalitions, there's research that supports that standard return on investment is at minimum double. And it really depends, again, on all the things we talked about before. Is this coalition grounded in best practices that we've talked about? So there's your second headset. Third headset is just having some benefits of coalition building all on one sheet here for you. Maybe these kinds of things will speak to a target person that you're trying to engage or talk to this about. That coalition building increases community concern and consensus for an issue. Decreases duplication of efforts and services, that there's more trust and communication among core sectors and organizations affected by and working on these issues, that we get a pool of the talents and the resources, that we're sharing the risk and the responsibilities. It's a shared problem in the community, and we're all sharing the solution to it. Access to untapped community assets. I love this bumper sticker. People support what they help to create. So if the community owns the problem, they own the solution, they're going to support what they help to create, and it's going to be sustainable. Right? So that's headset number 3. Here's a fourth way to look at this, and I'm going to share this from Coalition's work. If you've not ever gone to that website, Fran Butterfoss and her staff have created some amazing tools for coalitions regardless of what issue you're working on. And Fran Butterfoss herself is a researcher, and she has books and a lot of articles about the research behind coalitions, how to organize yourself best, how coalitions work, why they work. She's created a top 10 reasons why you should embrace coalitions and partnerships. So this is something you could use as a PowerPoint in your community when you're engaging people, or create a top 10 list. I like it in this PowerPoint only because I love the pictures she found that she used with it. So I'm just going to scroll through these very quickly. Know that you've got this link and you can find this online and download this PowerPoint yourself. But she's got 10 reasons here why you should embrace coalitions and partnerships. Not sure why she used cats. Maybe she likes cats. All right, coalitions and partnerships demonstrate and develop support and responsibility for a community issue. Nice bumper sticker summary. That they maximize the power of individuals and groups through collective action. We've talked about that. Nice way to summarize it in one sentence. Building strength and cohesiveness by connecting individuals and organizations. That's crucial in communities. That we're improving trust and communication between agencies and organizations, getting rid of turf, right, and working together better. Coalitions and partnerships also increase community participation and leadership, which a lot of funders or large high-level stakeholders or gatekeepers are very interested in the community. Maybe the soundbite for you is how it mobilizes diverse talents, resources, and strategies. Or another reason that community coalitions and partnerships are so effective is they change community norms and social acceptability of specific risky behaviors. As well, they help communities to, different community members and organizations to share costs as well as the associated risks with the solution. That we share power to reduce potential conflicts, so we all work together better. And last but not least, her 10th reason that coalitions and partnerships work is that they reach outcomes that any one organization could not do alone, really looking at that synergistic effect of coalitions. So there's a fourth headset of something you could use in order to gauge people on the concept of why a coalition is important and why it works. Fifth would just be kind of the elevator speech, the one-sentence summary of what coalitions achieve. They enable communities to build capacity and develop interventions that meet their specific community's needs, are community-owned, are culturally sensitive, and likely to be sustained. Boom. There it all, a whole bunch of what we've said is in one sentence. So maybe that'll be helpful for you. So let's go ahead and hear from Derek on some of your responses for those of you who've made a successful case for coalitions, what tips you can share with others. Derek.
Thank you, Allison. I didn't have quite as much time compiling the list this time as I did for the previous question, but some of the trends that we saw are looking at it for the what's in it for me, for the partner, for some successful tips. So when you're looking to contact or build those partnerships, look at what's in it for them and why should they be a partner with you. How does it benefit them, and how are you making your job easier? Also, big focus on data. Show the problems that you have in your community within numbers. Also, focus on the dollars. Coalitions, partnerships, prevention saves money. It's much more effective than treatment, and it's much more effective than not doing prevention or treatment. Also, along the lines of money, show that return on investment. Show how some shared expenses could be beneficial to all partners. So you're reducing budgetary expenses kind of on all ends, and it also decreases the duplication of service. Also, when you're looking at successful tips for making the case for coalitions, when you're kind of making this introduction, do some logic modeling and show the challenges that you have in your community and going back to that data as to why it's been identified as a challenge, and your very thoughtful, logical, and planned approach to solving it, and how they're integrated partners in making that problem become lessened or no longer a problem. Also, be relevant and know your community. Don't try to institute something that your community doesn't have buy-in for. And the whole purpose of community coalitions is there's power in numbers, and you can do a lot more collaboratively than you can individually. So focus on that. And you're not trying to reinvent the wheel or do something more or something that hasn't been done. You're trying to build upon what your community strengths and resources already have. And when you're looking at kind of getting community buy-in, really focusing on the health and wellness issue, not necessarily more volatile topics such as equal rights when you're talking about military, legal age versus underage drinking. That can kind of take you down to an area that you don't want to go, although we do have good countermeasures for that. But always focus on the health and wellness of the community and the individuals, particularly the students there, to help get some of that buy-in.
Beautiful. I want to piggyback on one of the ones that Derek mentioned, because I think it is a really great example, because I'm really pushing the SPIF as a headset, and I'll let you know that to do the SPIF well and right can be a very intensive process, and you can actually lose people from the table who are wanting to jump right to implementation and action, and you're doing all this slowed down data development, right, in order to create a data-driven plan. And a strategic plan, and then an action plan that you then would act from. So as you think about this, the one person said having a logic model, and what I heard within that was using that then to engage others. So telling you a story from a community I've recently done some consulting with, that community does not have the data they need. They have some initial data. They are still a little assumption driven, but they still went through a planning process that was kind of, I'm going to use some car analogies now instead of being a farmer. Instead of being the Cadillac version of the SPIF, which is more intensive and is really good solid ground, they still did better because they did a mini SPIF, so mini coupe version of the SPIF, that they didn't have as much data, but they used what they had, and they know where their questions still are, but they went ahead and created a logic model as an initial group of only like 4 or 5 key players. And they went through still a pretty intensive planning process in order to create a logic model and still married it with the science and identified some strategies they wanted to start to do, keeping in mind their sense of their community's readiness, because they had done a readiness assessment a few years prior. It was a little long in tooth, but they still felt it was still pretty accurate. And so they were able to begin some ideas of some strategies and action planning, and based on that they went, who else do we need in order to achieve this? Let's use this to engage them in the short term and get some movement happening, and then we're going to engage them in a much more deeper version of the SPIF that's going to run parallel to continuing with this mini version of an action plan while we're doing a more detailed, intensive SPIF, because we're going to go find resources. Part of that plan is creating a data committee and doing the SPIF right by starting with a lot more data. So now we need more players to say, we'll help with getting that data done. We can provide a focus group facilitator, or we can gather the people, and that can be where the focus group is. Or we'll put some money in to help fund a student survey or a parent survey. So they're using a mini version of the SPIF to get enough of a plan to engage a core group, and that core group's going to feel a sense of progress and then be more willing to be engaged in a longer term planning of going through the SPIF in a more intensive way. you never go through the spiff once anyway. You go round and round and round that flower in a cycle. It's a cycle of planning. So just a few other thoughts on that. I love that someone brought up how you can use a logic model to make a case. If you've got that groundwork done, that's something you engage people around. We've already got the plan. We need your help, right? Beautiful. Love that. All right, so I meant before I did all that to let you know that we are next going to questions and answers. So hopefully you guys have been sending some in, and Derek's got some ready before we wrap this up.
And so far we only have one question, but also a comment. Maggie wanted to say that she utilizes CADCA's Strengthening Partnerships Toolkit, and that was beneficial to her community to kind of get a sense of things that each sector of the community could do and help build that. And for the question that I have is, when we're looking at assessment, how often should a coalition do assessment? And that question comes from Kathleen.
You know, Kathleen, and for anyone else who was thinking about that question, I don't think there's one recipe or answer for that. And also in my mind, honestly, when I think about the spiff, you've got to start with some level of assessment, even if it's rough and not real formal data, to get going on something. But part of your plan may be, how do we get more detailed data, like I was telling you, from that sample community? And because you go around that cycle of the spiff, you're really constantly always gathering data. Assessment is ongoing in my mind. But to formally come back, it's really as you've done evaluation, right, as you come around the spiff. And I wish I knew which slide it was on so I could throw the flower up here real quick. Let me see if I can do that for us, for those not as familiar with it. So as you look at that assessment step, right, notice how it's right next to evaluation. So as you've gone around and you've done some work and you've evaluated your progress, you go back to your baseline data, and some of that may be, well, now that we've done this, we've got some more questions. How do we get them answered? We need to know X, Y, and Z as well in order to fix our plan or hone our plan a little bit more so that we can then go and implement some other strategies that supplement what we do or change what we do so we can be even more effective and see more progress when we next evaluate, and then we come back around to assessment again. I can't tell you how often that is or what timeline that is. That's very organic within your coalition's life, right, and lifespan. So hopefully that was a little bit helpful there, Kathleen. Back to any other questions?
Yes, we do have another question, and as you're kind of thinking about the questions that might pop up, please feel free to enter those in the question section of the GoToWebinar navigation panel. The next question we have is, do you have any resources coalitions going through a restructuring process might be able to utilize?
Absolutely. In fact, that kind of takes us to our next slide as well. And somebody, I forget her name, already mentioned CADCA. CADCA, if you're not familiar with it, Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, even if your focus issue is not tobacco, alcohol, other drugs, I highly recommend you check into CADCA. They have some incredible toolkits, some great training, their Coalition Institute training. I know here in Ohio we're hosting one. That information is on our website. I think we still have some seats available. It's 3 different weeks throughout the year, and the first one's in November. Excellent training. So that Strengthening Partners Toolkit that our other person who Derek mentioned had put in that comment, you can find that kind of stuff on the CADCA website. So you can make a note. Maggie, thank you, is the one who brought that up. And then I had also mentioned Fran Butterfoss's organization, Coalitions Work, and that's at coalitionswork.com versus CADCA.org. So there's some great resources that we definitely would want to point you guys to. We also do have some resources. I'm just going to go ahead and mention, and we'll see what other questions that we have, because I know we're coming down on our time here. We have resources for folks within Ohio who are members of our statewide Prevention Coalition Association. We have a number of toolkits for them. So if you are in Ohio and you're thinking about starting a coalition, or you already have one and didn't know that we have a coalition of coalitions in Ohio, know that we have a member center page with some toolkits as well within our web resources for our partners here in Ohio. For folks in Ohio and outside of Ohio, we also do offer a number of more intensive training opportunities that go well beyond a webinar. Some of the training opportunities that you may see on our website, if you go on our homepage and you scroll down and you'll see that training opportunities icon, you could view the catalog. From that catalog, 3 trainings that we already have ready to go and can come out to your community and do at any time that relate to things that we talked about today: coalition development and maintenance, more intensive for your coalition members to kind of assess themselves and look at their recruitment, their teamwork, their conflict resolution, etc., score themselves on some things and look at how well they work together to get the work done. environmental prevention strategies more in depth, CAMP, that community norms, access availability, media messages, and policy and enforcement of looking at those 4 environmental prevention factors. And then prevention works, but what works in prevention if you're looking to build the capacity of your coalition in the science base when you're ready for planning and you need those evidence-based strategies of what works so they don't reinvent a bad wheel. That's a training that might be just in time for your coalition as well. And if you want more information about that, it's there on our website, or you also certainly could contact me, and my contact information is there while we pause again for Derek to see what other questions or comments we have before we wrap up.
We've got one question and one comment. The comment is from Libby, and she says the piece that she liked best was the elevator speech. So it's something that she has to quickly kind of get out there because coalition development can be kind of hard to explain. And then the question is from Lynn, and her question is, we have a coalition in a small town, and they're having a hard time getting our local police on board. They have a sense of looking the other way when addressing underage drinking, gatherings with local youth. How do we affect change to promote the social host laws?
Wow, that could be a webinar in and of itself. So let me just point you to a few resources. If you've never gone to the Underage Drinking Enforcement Training Center website, I'm going to say that again slow, Underage Drinking Enforcement Training Center, under their law enforcement link, I believe, you can find a survey for law enforcement on their attitudes around underage drinking. So if you can get some buy-in from leadership to send out that survey, maybe put it in SurveyMonkey so it can be completely anonymous, or come in at shift change and ask some officers to do that, you can then get a sense of where is the culture of your law enforcement organization with their attitudes and beliefs around underage drinking, because you've got to assess that before you can move it, because you got to be able to meet them where they're at. If you're having a hard time engaging that law enforcement leadership, I believe there's also some resources about that, either under law enforcement or on the coalitions tab of the Underage Drinking Enforcement Training Center website, which Derek is now showing you, I believe. He's gone to it for us because he's so good. So Lynn, I hope that helps with some thoughts about buy-in. That, again, could be its own webinar.
And those are all the questions that we have time for today. We will be sending a session out post webinar, and we'll have that available to you as well, so we can get a better sense of what your needs are and how we can better engage you and your community. Allison, you wanted to mention something else?
No, just wanted to make sure you have that slide.
Oh, yep. And then finally, wanted to invite you to attend our next prevention webinar, which will be held on November 19th. All of our webinars will be 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, so make sure you check out your local times for that to make sure that we're all on the same page. And the topic is the Strategic Prevention Framework, looking at an overview of that and how it might be able to be utilized in your community. Again, we'll be sending out a link to the recorded session as well as the copy of the PowerPoint slides to you hopefully sometime tomorrow, if not early next week. And if you have additional questions, you can feel free to ask Allison, and her information is on the screen yet again. Thank you so much for all of your time today. Hopefully this has been valuable to you and your community, and we look forward to you joining us on November 19th. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.